Quebec, Montreal, Canada, who were shortly be leaving Canada and going to New Zealand. And he's going to be talking about Papert's sort of right in mathematics.
Well, hi everybody. I'm very happy to be with you today, and so yeah, talk a little bit about this idea that I had lately, titled Papert sort of right. I was listening to Papert, the YouTube presentation that he made, and he made a side comment. He was presenting a local program to solve a math problem, and the program actually doesn't work. And this is what he said.
The total math was 14, said so well with mathematics as it's taught in schools that you can't be sort of right.
Right, so Papert making that comment, to put that in context, we just remind ourselves how Papert always insisted on kids doing mathematics and not adults teaching it. That's his focus from my understanding. And also how he sees that mathematics is something that we do. It's not a set fixed of knowledge to be transmitted. And so it's that kind of perspective that he talks about errors as occasion to learn, and that's what he explained in the video after that little comment. He's talking about debugging, of course, and how fixing error is something that helps us learn. But it was very interesting to me also because it connects a lot with the kind of work that we've been doing in our lab over the last 5 years, trying to rethink errors from an epistemological perspective. And for example, trying to look at the foundation, epistemological foundation of error. Error as instance of knowing, or errors as belonging to the observer. Those kinds of reflection that actually wants and tries to go beyond wanting to fix students or teachers or situations, having a very, very different look at those kind of things, and actually focus on doing mathematics, exploring possibilities. And in that sense, conceptualize mathematical ideas and processes as emergent, moving, temporal, evocative, and so on. So that's the kind of work that we're doing at the lab. And hearing Papert make that comment about sort of being sort of right really got me thinking and asking, well, what if sort of right was right enough without even debugging? And actually, in that case, Papert did not fix the program during the presentation. He just moved on. So this sort of right was enough. And so what about sort of right mathematics? What could this mean? And what could be the potential? And if you think about it for a minute, I believe that most of our knowing of the people around us, when we know someone, we know that person in a sort of right manner, not in a precise factual manner. And so I think that there is something very interesting there to think about and keep thinking about constructionism in terms of doing mathematics. Just to bring back again some guidelines, but we tend to forget our approximate answers also play a very important role in different branches of mathematics. And I just listed a few here, like applied mathematics, experimental mathematics, even stuff like fuzzy logics, or proofs that are very hard to be checked, something that is very, very present. And you also have it for the people who worked in the humanistic tradition. When you look at how doing mathematics is done, right? There's also a list of things that we can think about and see how doing mathematics is very often being sort of right in many different ways. So we can go back in the discussion if you want to talk more about these things. I just wanted to list a few and I explained them a little bit more in the paper if you're not so familiar. But as sort of a background, now it got me thinking, well, so what about now trying to stretch this idea a little bit and think about, sort of right mathematics in relation with mathematics education. And there again, I found in the literature some very interesting concepts that are very close to this idea. The first one that came to mind is the concept of good enough, discussed by Reed and Zach in Ethelyn in 2003-2004. And they talk about their 5th grade students' understanding as being good enough understanding. And this is the problem that the kids were working with. the classroom was insisting on knowing why this particular formula would work. And if you know this formula, you know that it's not the easiest one to explain, especially for 5th graders. But they still wanted to know, and so the teacher and the researcher decided to go with it and try to provide an explanation for the students. And they observed that, so in the end, the student gave unstable, often incorrect explanation of the various factors using the pyramid and so on. And so they didn't really understand it fully, they said, but nevertheless they got a sense of why the formula works, and they were happy with that. And this is what they describe as good enough understanding. And they comment this about the whole project that they were running. They say, much of what we observed was incomplete, undated, and sometimes inconsistent. Yet at the same time, the students were able to continue to work on the problems, explore, and even explain things to each other that they seem not to fully understand themselves. So I think this is very, very interesting to push forward. And actually, is this not always the case in a mathematics classroom? When is it the case that all the students understand everything and that's a condition to move on? We don't have that very, very often. So sort of right or good enough understanding is the bread of mathematics education in school, I think. Another interesting observation is the research by Rowland on the role of vagueness in students' mathematical talk. And so he explained how vagueness is something that helps orient oneself and another while doing mathematics. It shows how the students discuss things that they don't fully master, and they can nevertheless make progress and become part of the mathematical culture. And what he's doing is analyzing conversation like this between the teacher and the students or among students. And it shows how the students would very often use wrong words or give partial accounts or try to make uncompromising observation about the mathematics that's going on. And so they keep it very vague in many ways, but this is what allows them to keep on going and do mathematics. So that's, I guess, another way where we can see that it's sort of right mathematics in the doing is present in school. Another very neat example comes from my colleague Jean-Francois Maheux, who works on students solving strategies, doing mental math with objects other than numbers. And so what he describes is the students' viable strategies. And he found that the solving process of the students, they don't need to be optimal. And if you think about doing mental math, that's very often what you do. It's not optimal. But he also found that it's not even always fully mathematically sound. And this is a nice example. So he gave that equation to students to try and solve mentally. You can take 30 seconds to figure it out. And so one of the students to which he gave that came up with this strategies. He decided to flip it around. It was more easy for him to just have the 3x on top and then very quickly find the value for x. And it works. But of course, mathematically, we can absolutely argue that this is not correct. But it's sort of right, I guess, in a certain way. And then there's a number of studies, of papers, that talks about the ambiguity of varies across time and depending on what it involves, or the definition of circle in different geometry that is also very, very different, or ambiguous if you mean, or the meaning of slope. What is the slope of a graph? It depends on the scale. This is not a very strong mathematical concept, but it's very, very present in school. And so Sapsky explored that with mathematicians and students of right mathematics school, teaching and learning, and what could this mean? And for example, why not specifically ask students for approximate answers, good enough solution, viable procedures, instead of asking always for something that is right? What about trying to find topics to bring about and bring forth sort of right mathematics more specifically? One of the reviewer of the paper I submitted made that very interesting comment, and I want to agree with that. He said that mathematics in the constructionist tradition is often very close to modeling. Right? And why not then highlight the sort of right aspect of modeling when we model things, when we do math in that fashion? What about pushing it a little bit further and, for example, model mathematical concepts like mathematicians sometimes do for certain purposes? That would be another possibility. How about, again, systematically, and I insist on that, try to explore accessible but difficult problems, even open problems, and a couple of people have experimented in that direction. I think it's interesting. How about playing with the contextuality of mathematical ideas? And then again, a few people have done that, but not necessarily in a very systematic manner, more like in a, one-shot kind of thing. What about experimenting paradox and controversies? It's been a long time since I studied doing that kind of things, but there were some that were done a couple of years ago, and so on. And do that, again, as I said, as occasion to insist on the sort of right aspect of doing mathematics, because I believe there is something very important there to be dealt with in terms of, for example, the public image of mathematics. And so in the bigger picture, another way to see this, again, I go back to Papert when he says that constructionism means giving children good things to do. And I believe that you can find in those things very good things to do for the students. And for me, the sort of right aspect of mathematics emphasizes the open-endedness of knowing and doing mathematics. And this is where my current research lies, more theoretical, you will see, but I'm planning on implementing some of that in the near future. So fundamentally, I found that this openness can be seen as the inevitable counterpart of the finitude, of the possibility to fix mathematics in a certain way. Because we can fix it, then its sort of right aspect also comes together with it. We can make statements, we can write mathematics, we can conceptualize ideal objects, but with that, there's the counterpart that also always come in. And this is what I have theorized as the dialectic of perfection and imperfection of doing mathematics, a very creative dialectic actually that allows mathematics to live up to history and allows people to learn it. So this idea of the imperfection of doing mathematics is for me one way to go about. On the one hand, mathematics as a subject of study that can develop, outgrow itself. We have a lot of examples of that through history. And in that sense, much like a living creature. And again, I go back to and this idea of knowing mathematics as knowing someone. So mathematics is a living creature, and we get to know it by frequenting it, by interacting with it, by playing with it. And on the other side, this is also a way to go about mathematics as a doing that can actually take place because people do it, they flesh it out, they pursue it, whoever they are. And in that sense, I see it much like an art that is passed on and evolves throughout history as people do it and invite the next generation to join in. Again, with this focus on doing mathematics and having students doing it. And so finally, I would like to conclude with this quote from Papert, because I think it's the very spirit of what I have in mind here. I just simply hope that these examples will get you to think about what mathematics and how learning could change. There are just a few examples to provoke thinking, to get more and more people engaged in inventing the future of learning. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question? I have one myself, if I may. I'm probably loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes. So my question is, I found this very interesting. I'm not a mathematician. Mathematics is not a subject that I teach. But what strikes me about it, this is really interesting, playing with this flexibility and exploring potentials, but how does something like that fit within our much more rigid curriculums that we have in schools that governments place upon us? And actually 5 minutes ago, and how do we resolve these nice ideas and constructionist ideas with things that we're required to do, like PISA?
Yeah.
Because we're all, I presume, familiar with PISA. You know, so national test, but it's international and you know, applied. So how do you resolve that tension?
Yeah. So I think there are two things that we can see about that. I think that on the one hand, there's certainly a potential to go about some of these ideas and find a way to connect that with the mathematics that is done in school. For example, in the examples that I give with the concept of slope and so on, I mean, this is mathematical ideas that are presented in most schools, and it's interesting to work with them. But again, pretty much in the spirit of Papert, when he wrote about mathematics, I'm not trying to develop something that they're going to put in schools and fix school or change schools. I'm thinking somewhere else. I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about just what is true to mathematics and not necessarily what is true to schooling and the way that we want to do these things. But I think that it's not exactly correct in a certain way to say that, because thinking outside school is also moving school. It's also creating possibilities. It's also showing what the future of school could be if it was done differently. And so I think that these are examples. You know, curriculums are evolving. People are changing them on a pretty regular basis. And so how do you get something new inside a curriculum? Well, this is precisely because people are thinking about new stuff that can be done, and they try to make points that it might be important to do this and to do that and to change the focus. So I think that there's a potential in that for maybe not tomorrow, you know, go into schools and help students be better on testing. And that's a good thing, because I'd rather not go in that direction. But there's something I believe interesting for school in a larger sense.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes. So you're a professor of mathematics,
Yes.
So
Can I give you this? Behind you.
So as a professor of mathematics, what are the things that you find to be the most important when implementing this sort of reasoning into your way to teach?
Yeah, okay. So what is interesting with this is that it's very, very good in occasions to get students to genuinely engage in doing mathematics. So to really do mathematics and to problematize what is doing mathematics, because it's not clear at all, right? We have, again, I didn't talk about that, but if you think about ethnomathematics, for example, so what counts as math, what doesn't count as mathematics, what is going on when we're working on a project, and what are the mathematical aspects of, you know, wanting to I don't know, you know, all of the schools projects that are done. For example, I once got students to try and figure how many people would participate in a protest. And so we went out, and the students were very interested. They were very engaged with protests for students about global warming or something like that, and they wanted to be part of that. And so we went there, but I also had them to think about figuring ways to know how many people were there that day. But it was not easy at all for them to figure what were the mathematical aspects of this project and what were the more social ones. And this is also something that is interesting with doing mathematics in that way, that it problematizes what counts as mathematics, why we would say that this is correct and that this is not. And I think this is something that is interesting. And also because it enables students to engage on projects that are also within a specific culture, right? We have this idea in Constructionism that students have to have their own project and come up with things that they are interested in and they want to explore. And this also means that mathematics is something like that. It's a math land, but not just in the computer, in a whole. And these are, I think, very interesting things to go and explore and find your own kind of solutions and understanding and argumentation and so on. So, yeah. this is where I kind of see it.
Do you think that, just to jump on, do you think that in the curriculum you were saying that they have to stick to, could they just respond to their students' sort of inquisitions in a more positive way? Like, that's not right, but that's awesome. Would that be able to, like, be beneficial?
Yeah, I guess at the very basic, this is not correct. I'm not saying how can you fix that, but saying, well, if that was right, where would it take us? And just explore that a little bit, or just push it a little bit, because then along the line you're going to fall back also to a number of things that is normally done. And most of the mathematics that we choose to do in school is kind of connected in various ways, right? It's more or less self-sustaining, and so if you're going in a way that is not going to be productive, you're gonna figure that out eventually.
Okay, I think we've got 2 more questions. Dave?
Yeah, I'm thinking about task design. I spend a lot of my time thinking about task design, and also reflecting on the demonstration lesson for the first graders, yesterday was it? Where the teacher put a lot of emphasis on volition, of the children having volition, having the opportunity to make their own decisions. And it seems to me that one of the aspects of what you're talking about is the way in which, if you can think of tasks which are open to the idea that mathematics is good enough, then it opens up the possibilities of the children going in many directions and having some volition about which direction they choose to go. So I think it's a good criterion to have for task design.
Yeah, and maybe just 2 short comments on that. What really matters is that students do math, not that they learn specific concept, specific content. You can be concerned with that, but I am not. And so if the question is doing math, then I think this is very rich in that perspective. And I think I forgot the other thing I wanted to say. Sorry.
Okay. I think we've got time for one final question.
Setting. So I can see that people do mathematics through many ways, like weaving, cloth weaving, basket weaving,
Yes.
or house construction, so on. And the children also practice doing mathematics with their hands.
Yes.
But in the classroom, they need to learn another mathematics. So there is no connection between what they call cultural mathematics and
Yes.
classroom mathematics.
Yes, very interesting, and actually that reminds me of the other thing I wanted to say. So things, right? And at the heart of invention, there's also a dialectic between the old and the new. When you invent something, you have to recognize that what is already there, and you have also to. This is necessary to bring something new, right? So you always have the old and the new. And if there's something that school can do that practices outside of the schools don't, is precisely to give students access to this history and this tradition of doing mathematics in the way what we usually call mathematicians do it. And I've been doing it for centuries. And how it's done in engineering schools, or how it's done in fundamental mathematics at the university level. So that practice, our students, our children, how are they going to know about that if it's not through school? So school is a perfect place actually to do that, but we have to make sure that what is happening in school is in that spirit, and that it actually gives them this opportunity. Like I said, like you do dancing when you go, and it doesn't mean you're going to become a professional dancer, but you can get a sense of what is that thing. So I guess, yeah.
Right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be here until Friday.